was just on point. He really started that whole kind of farm to table movement. Craig is his allocates are numerous. I mean, it's more than I can actually remember. But he's going to spend some time with you. He's going to spend the next 45 minutes with you talking about something that's really, really awesome. He's going to talk about humanized leadership and why have employees all. He's going to give you a really great debate about it. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Craig Shelton.
Woo! Thank you, Don. Thank you. Well, listen, thank you so much for allowing me to come here today. It's really quite an honor. And I want to pick up on something Donald said about knowledge is not power. We have to take knowledge and turn it into action. But I want to take it one step anterior to that, one step deeper, which is how does information become knowledge? We now know through science of neurobiology that you don't learn anything until you teach it. And so in every restaurant, we see classes given. All of these seminars, I highly recommend that you get the PDF version of the presentation and try teaching it to someone else. Then it will become yours. Humanized leadership, or why have any employees at all? The factory of the future will have only 2 employees, a man and a dog. The man will be there to feed the dog. The dog will be there to keep the man from touching the equipment. That's kind of a joke. But it does feel like the human being is made to feel less and less important. Is there a threat that robots are going to take all the hospitality jobs because labor productivity is so low? What they really mean is that we must choose either human beings and poor performance or robots and high performance, and this is exactly wrong. Our real problem is that the fatal flaws in our business models have gone undetected, uncorrected for over 100 years. And our labor management theories are also all wrong. So the real answer is to fix the flaws in our false premises. Go all the way down in deep thinking to the first axiom. What is it we are assuming? In every kitchen in the Western world, chefs used to say 40 years ago, we sear a piece of meat to lock in the juices. This is because Escoffier taught us this 100 years ago. Scientists knew this was wrong 120 years ago. And we never corrected that first assumption. And we built up a whole body of cooking and recipes that was based on a false first assumption. Turn the ovens up high, etc. Humanistic leadership is leading people in a way that's best for human beings. And it also produces outstanding financial results. Does anyone here in the audience own a restaurant? Okay. Of the people who own a restaurant, is your problem you make too much money? Does anybody have the problem that they make too much money? No, I suspect not. Using labor and technology differently is what I want to talk about today. And we could increase profits by as much as 3,000 basis points, or go from 1% profit to 31% profit. And how are we going to do this? By questioning everything we think we know. I'll discuss 6 or 7 or 8 major areas. Now, the restaurant industry in America, I sometimes wonder if it ought to be relabeled the capital destruction industry. As you see up here, the return on invested capital is not greater than the weighted average cost of capital for independent restaurants. Those red numbers mean that restaurant industry independent on average in America is destroying capital, not producing capital. Okay? You've got, and I encourage you, I'm going to flip through this fast. There's probably 50 hours of material in this presentation. Okay, how can I say go all the way and question the first assumptions? That sounds rather arrogant. But recent neuroscience in the last 20 years has unearthed this incredible thing. and it's about the mind itself. This book by Ian McGilchrist has often been called the most important book of the century, and any leader should be reading it. It's about the divided brain. It's the fact that we have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere, and they're for two completely opposite uses. Every animal in the evolutionary history has a big problem. One is it needs to eat. But the problem is it has to eat without getting eaten by something else. So the left-hand hemisphere is that one which focuses like a laser beam on the, let's say the bird is looking at the worm. And it's trying to calculate how exactly to jump, how fast to move, and to get that, be able to get that worm. But at the same time, the right hemisphere is focusing in all directions so that it doesn't become someone else's lunch. Now, for the left brain, the left hemisphere, to make calculations, for logic to exist, a process called reification must occur, in which something which is a being is treated like it's only an object. Something which is a system is simplified and treated as if it's only an object, and then we can do simple math. How many people have heard the phrase, keep it simple, stupid? Okay, let's talk about that. It comes from Occam's razor, the idea that when there's more than one answer, the simplest one is usually the correct one. Well, the truth of it is, if you look through the intellectual history, it's never been true. Every single time, it's been the more complex, the more difficult, the more subtle, and the far more complex answer, which is almost always true. Think of quantum physics. Think of gravity. Massively complicated. So, I don't say keep it simple, because I don't think truth is almost ever simple. Oscar Wilde said it beautifully. He said the truth is rarely pure and never simple. We can keep stupid simple, but we can't keep truth simple. It's always a quest to deeper and deeper levels. Now, in some societies, there has been a respect for these two types of things. The right-hand brain is very non-logical, non-linear. It's open to all possibility. And the left-hand brain is very axiomatic. But they're both crucially important. One, the fact that you have these two types is a corrective mechanism. I happen to wear a mechanical wristwatch. I know that it's not accurate. I know that it loses time. And so once a week, I look into my cell phone and then I make the correction. We have forgotten that this is a problem with our brain, that the left hemisphere needs regular correction because it's making an error at the very first step when we make definitions. So the neuroscience of the divided brain teaches us we should not be surprised to encounter intellectual failure at the institutional level. Instead, we should expect it. So my story, I started out as a very, very serious academic kid. I went to Yale. I studied molecular biophysics and biochemistry, English literature. But I'm also a dual citizen of France and America. And I spent most of my summers in France, and we were involved in gastronomy. And something was puzzling me, and it became more and more of a cognitive tension. My teachers in school were telling me a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. But my experience in France and in Europe was, we'd come here, we would eat anything, everything, including dessert, and I would lose weight and feel even more clear in the mind. Go back to America, eat the grain-based diet, put on weight, feel a little sluggish, and eating less calories. It didn't make any sense. Somewhere along the way, I decided to stop. I was no longer going to go to medical school to become a neurosurgeon. Instead, I'm going to become a chef. There's some wisdom, there's some right brain knowledge that our left brain is missing in this whole thing about nutrition. So then I went and I apprenticed in 8 of the 3-star Michelin restaurants here in Europe. Girardet, Chapelle, Jamin, the original, with Robuchon, Berge de Lille, and so forth. And then I went to New York and opened Le Bernardin, which was a 3-star Michelin restaurant for fish. And then I became the chef chef de cuisine of Boulet, the original Boulet, when it was, the best restaurant in America. Then I said I'm going to leave New York City and go to the country. Why? I want a project that will restore sanity to the agricultural, to the food system in America. I realized that the secret to European cuisine was European agriculture. That it provided things that were, the inputs were healthy. They were what our body was designed to run on in our evolutionary development over hundreds of thousands of years. And we became the first totally organic, certified, high nutrient density farm as a restaurant in 1990. We grew over 2,000 different types of plants every year. After 20 years of that, I then became more academic. I became a professor at Princeton University. I have a consulting company. I have an agriculture company that does holistic, integrated agriculture. So what did I learn from that 20 years of being in the country? Have any of you traveled to America? Ever? Yeah, oh good. This I'm sure you will have noticed, which is a remarkable difference between Europe and America. In Europe, your good restaurants are to be found everywhere, in the countryside, in the suburbs, and in the cities. In fact, probably more of them are not in the cities than the total number in the cities. Yes? But in America, it is exactly the opposite. 100% of our restaurants are in the cities, are good restaurants. A few exceptions, they're generally found to be in resorts. Why is this? Why is it so different? It's because in the rest of the world, restaurants were developed while your societies were still highly aristocratic or even had empire. And it's based on a single seating. You don't tell Lord Chesterfield he has to leave because another table's coming in. But in America, being a democracy from an early age, decolonialized, we had busy people, and restaurants, like at Boulet, #1 restaurant in America in New York, we did 4 seatings every single night. 4 seatings, 80 chairs, 320 people every night. That creates something unusual, because your labor and your overhead is actually fixed. When you do 4 seatings, you can cut your price in half. So, the first major false premise I want to cover is the American geography fallacy. That we can replicate an urban business model in America in a non-urban location without major modification. So what I see is everyone who tries it, the model fails. They don't say to themselves, I built something wrong. Instead, it must be manager's fault. This will show you. By having 4 complete seatings, we get about 10% profit. But if we were to produce the same exact level of service, the same number of waiters per chair, like in New York at the time, we had 1 waiter and 1 cook, or we had 1 employee for every single chair in the dining room. In Europe, you have even more in the 3-star Michelin restaurants. And you need that same number of people, whether you do 1 seating or you do 4 seatings. You need that many cooks to do that quality. You need that many waiters to do that level of service. But if you have only 1 seating, it predicts a 230% expense, or 130% loss with perfect management. And that was the Ryland Inn when I arrived. They were losing 130%. This shows you what happens not only as you move from the city to the edge of the city, to the suburbia, and to the countryside. This also, the blue square, shows you what happens when your sales mix of beverage to food changes. This is a 50-50 model, the blue square, and notice we have an 85% loss in the country. If it goes to 40% sales, food, a beverage, and 60 food, it goes to 112% loss. At 30%, 130% loss. At 20%, 152% loss. Imagine that you should be bonusing your managers when you're only losing 150%. What this meant for me was that I could not afford to have one employee per chair. I only could afford one employee for 13 chairs. I had to come up with a way to get 13 times the productivity out of my people. 1,300% productivity. And we did. Now, we can use this knowledge to increase the profitability of restaurants, for example, by creating hybrid models. We know, for example, that there's no geographic penalty for a wedding facility, for example. Whether it's in the city or whether it's in the country, a bride and groom, only one wedding an entire night. So there's no inherent probability. A hotel, you can only have one group sleep in a room, in a single night. You can't cut it up into pieces. So what we can sometimes do is create a hybrid business. If you're going to do a business in America, in the suburbs or in the country, maybe it should be mostly a large hotel with a small restaurant, or a large banquet facility with a small restaurant. Second major false premise, the single business fallacy. This will apply even in Europe. This is a really important one. We all believe and we all talk as if our restaurant is a single business. We sell food and wine. We sell food and beverage. And this is conceptually false. And the belief in this, it forces us to misprice everything on our menu, everything on our wine list. In fact, it turns almost every customer we have into a bad customer we lose money on. And it also creates an intentionally upside down, perverse system of incentives. Every restaurant I see in America is also trying to steal the competition's worst customers and ignoring the best. Thought experiment number one. Here's a restaurant with a 50-50 sales mix. And in America, this is the standard for independent restaurants. 1% operating profit. Half of it food, half of it beverage. Now imagine if for some reason the bartender wasn't checking the ID. In America, they have to make sure you're old enough to drink, and one night they didn't, and the government took your liquor license away for a year. This is what would happen. You would lose the $5 million of beverage sales and the beverage cost, and you would be left with the food only. So the question is, how much of that labor can you shave and still produce the $5 million of food? And the answer is not a penny. You need 100% of the labor allocation for the food. Beginning to see something here, right? How much of that overhead can you shave and still produce only the food? You need to spend all of it. You can't shave any. So what this really means is we manufacture food at a 75% loss. That's why we have to mark up our beverages ×4 in order to just break even. Why do we lose so much money on food? Because we price it as if we only retail it, like a reseller. This is how every restaurant in the world basically prices food. This is the European model. We take the cost of goods and multiply ×3. So our pasta dish at 3 becomes 9, chicken 5.15, steak 10.30, and rack of lamb 15 becomes 45. Now if you subtract from that menu price, which is our retail price, if you subtract the cost of goods, that gives you what's called gross margin. $6, $10, $20, and $30. Now our accountants, our finance experts tell us to allocate a fixed percentage of that gross margin towards labor. In this model, 50%, 3, 5, 10, and $15. And 40% of overhead, 2, 44, 8, and 12, leaving you to a net operating income of 60 cents, $1, $2, and $3. And that's the theoretical model. But is it real? No, it's not. In physics, we say if something is possible, given enough time, it will happen. So imagine the impossible actually happens. One night, a suburban restaurant, single seating, 100 people come in. That night, everyone ordered the pasta dish. Who could explain it? On the next night, 100 people sat and they all had the chicken. On the third night, they all had the steak. On the fourth night, they all had the lamb. So the question is there even a penny's difference in theoretical labor cost in those 4 situations? And the answer is no. It doesn't take any difference in labor those 4 nights. What about overhead? The same thing, no difference. So here we go. What this is really saying is that the labor and overhead of the middle model is the truth. No matter what the customer orders, the fixed expense in this particular restaurant is $18. Therefore, the true cost of the pasta is 3 plus 18, 21. We're losing 133% every time we sell the pasta. The chicken, we're losing 53% every time we sell it, and most people are buying the cheaper items. We're making only 6%, 7% on the steak, and we're gouging the rack of lamb customer at 27%. So, here's a customer reward program. All restaurants in America, they basically give you 1 point for every dollar you spend, whether it's food or beverage. But look at this. Here's a table, 6 people came in, they bought $100 of food each, no beverage. We lost $450 on this table, in reality. Here's a man who sits at the bar and had 2 cognacs and spent $80, and we made $60 of profit with him, but we give him only 80 points, and we reward the customer you lose money on. What if we did it differently? What if we had an enlightened pricing strategy? Okay? Here we say, we take the fixed, add to that $2 of profit, and the new prices are 23, 25, 30, and 35. We've aggregated everything to the center. We're not making much money on any customer, but most importantly, we're no longer losing money on any customer. In America, the restaurants that practice the traditional model, like this, are lucky if they have a 70-30 sales mix. Many of them it's 80-20. Customers simply refuse to pay these massive markups on wine any longer. So here we have a thought experiment. Watch this. I repriced it so we're only making $2 with every customer on their entree. And I'm cutting the price of every alcoholic beverage in half. We sell $3,000 of food, 30 times 100 people. It's a 50-50 sales mix, so we sell $3,000 in beverage now because it's barely more than going to a liquor store. We make $2 per person on the food is $200, and we make half of the sale. The gross margin all falls to the bottom line because we're no longer losing money on food. We now make 28% profit instead of 1% profit with a little bit of third-grade math. Third major false premise, provide an experience fallacy. Now understand what I'm saying. The idea of an experience, I am not arguing this is bad, but what I want to go is one step deeper, in which I talk about something more important than the experience. How did restaurants come into being? Originally, they are imitations of stately homes. Hundreds of years ago, we didn't have a whole network of municipal buildings. The administration of the state was done in stately homes. And they developed the regard system. Sometimes trade deals were negotiated, armaments, political plans. So the brigade system was designed to put both sides of the table at the dinner table into the right psychological state in order to be able to listen to the other side in good faith. After the French Revolution, the mercantile class imitated this with the first power restaurants, and they created the most perfect platform upon which to conduct the business of business. And then that was generalized into restaurants of every price point. Perfect platform upon which to conduct the business of life, whether that business is personal or business. Think of the traditional place that a man proposes to a woman. Think of the traditional place where we do business deals, restaurants. So the primary function of restaurant service is to help get the deal done, using ethical means to put both sides into an open mind to listen to each other in good faith. The idea that we are here to give the customer an experience often backfires because the waiter has only these tools, the steps of service and some product knowledge. And what seems to happen in America is that every single time the deal is about to close, we're right at that cusp when in a business deal, the other side is now listening to me. Every word I say, invariably in comes the waiter at the worst possible moment, interrupting that incredible moment of sealing the deal and disrupts it with the specials. And then the water pitcher is constantly interrupting. So what I'm trying to say here is, be a wingman. If you can't figure out what the deal is, at the minimum, don't do any harm. The deal is the priority. That's the most important thing. What does it matter if you told me the specials? I was trying to save my marriage. At that exact moment that my wife was ready to listen to me, you interrupted me with the specials and the moment was lost and now I'm divorced. How good do you think the food tastes to me now? Or a $20 million deal that you blew because you interrupted two adults in deep discussion. If you use this is what I did at the Ryland Inn. I said our primary purpose is to help deals get done. And billions of dollars of pharmaceutical deals, people would fly in all over the country. And the president, CEO of Merck told me, Craig, when we entertain at the Ryland Inn, we get our deals done far more often. We get our deals done far more quickly. And most importantly, we get our deals done far more profitably. And that's why I have authorized tripling the amount we spend at your restaurant. Because I don't look at it as an expense. I look at it as an investment. And what is my return on my investment? So if we redeploy our human resources to help our guests achieve the deals they bring to the table, and there is always a deal on every table, even if it's social media, it's my personal currency. I want that to improve. If you can help business people seal their deals, if you can help people in their personal lives seal their deals, if you can help a man or a woman save their marriage, then the price of the meal was nothing. And the return on investment could be 1,000 times. Fourth major false premise, the technician is a manager fallacy. In our business, in our industry, we tend to simply promote someone and give them a title, with no training in management or leadership. Most managers falsely believe that the primary function of the manager depends upon the position, that the primary function of a chef is way different than the primary function of a human rights director or a CFO. Instead, the primary function of all managers, of all leaders is exactly the same, which is to protect and grow all the assets of the company while increasing employee engagement, while increasing customer engagement, and increasing the equity value for the owners. But how many different types of assets are there? You have financial assets, you have real estate, you have FF&E, furniture, fixture, equipment. You have inventories. You have human capital. You have intellectual capital. You have non-strategic assets. You have reputational capital. And each one of those subjects takes years to master. And we don't give any training on any of these topics. So that's why we developed the Eon Mini MBA program. It compacts a massive amount of useful information into easy segments, maybe 50 to 100 hours. And it looks on the 6 major layers. One of the things I like to point out is, it's not enough to be a great leader. Because if you're a great leader, you're even more dangerous if you have the wrong map. You can march your team right off a cliff. It's not enough to know how just to lead. We have to know how to think so deeply. I, in my whole life of helping almost 2,000 restaurants, have never in my life seen a restaurant go out of business because people were not working hard enough. I've never seen it happen. Every time I see a restaurant go out of business, it's because people weren't thinking deeply enough and questioning all the way to the first principles. So the E-Myth, I can't recommend this book highly enough. What is business? Most people don't know. What are the 3 divisions of business? How should I organize my organizational chart? What is the E-Myth that a technician can, everything that makes a line employee, an hourly employee, everything that makes a line cook a great line cook will automatically make them a terrible manager, a terrible leader. Because it requires a completely different universe. The next level up is, how can you be a good leader of others if you don't lead yourself? Donald talks about it all the time. Extreme Ownership's a great book. Donald's work is keyed in on this. What is my culture? What is my integrity? What is my discipline? We also show how productivity, this book, everything I hear, the one thing that I know a person is not yet a manager, not yet a leader, is when they tell me this: Mr. Shelton, I don't have enough time. Anytime you hear somebody say, I don't have enough time, it means they don't yet know how to manage. And this book, Getting Things Done, is the single best help. Extreme Ownership is that now we can build teams. Now that I'm managing myself well, let's build great teams. Now this is the most important book ever written for business. So says every major business publication, from Harvard Business Review, Financial Times, Human Sigma, and I have never met anyone in the restaurant industry who has even heard of it, let alone read it. And we're talking about labor. We're always criticizing labor as our productivity is so low. We have so many errors. And we don't read the most important book, the greatest scientific study of all time on what works and what fails. Macro strategy, that's the map. I heard many times, you've said this, you've heard this, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result, right? We've all heard that. But if we stop and think, isn't that exactly the opposite of the truth? The only way that could be true is if the earth stood still. If nothing changed, then that would be a reasonable conclusion. But since the world is changing every day and changing at a very faster rate, the true definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting the same result. That's what's truly insane. In fact, in the restaurant industry, because it's so real estate intensive and so labor intensive, the true definition of insanity would be doing the same thing, running your business exactly the same way, over and over again, and not expecting it to get worse and worse and worse. Because that's where it leads. Finally, holistic knowing. Knowing what we don't know. Knowing the limitations of the mind, the brain, and how to make corrections for that is what really separates the pack. Fifth major false premise, the kitchen management fallacy, that we do not realize that our kitchens are manufacturing plants. We run our kitchens like we run our front of the house with something called cost basis accounting management. This idea that there are all these line item expenses, like labor, utilities, cost of, and if we shave any one of those, the profits will fall to the bottom line. Well, this theory almost killed manufacturing in the Western world. It was taught everywhere. And it took a physics professor from Israel to figure out why it was failing. And he developed something called the theory of constraints. It's one of the 16 books up there called The Goal. And what it talks about is the primary job of operational managers during service is to locate the bottlenecks, right? Every restaurant you've ever been in your life gets into the weeds, right? Things start slowing down. Oh my God, the garde-manger is buried, right? And then it moves to the grill, and then it goes out into the dining room, and things slow down. So what could have taken 90 minutes for an entire meal now takes an hour and a half. And in the suburbs, you only have that hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of time. That's the only time available. So look what I can do here. Look what we can do here. Everybody thinks their job, every restaurant I've ever been to, I shave the labor, I shave the labor. I said, I bet if I go in your kitchen on a Saturday night, I'll never see anyone standing around, right? Oh, of course not. I'll bet if you eat on Monday, I'll never see. You shave it so tight. Oh, yes, we do. That means you don't understand how to run a restaurant. You do not know how to run a kitchen. What I've done here, I said, you're not spending enough on labor. I want you to spend $1,000 more. And you have a team in the back in the kitchen, like tournants. Whenever that station gets behind, you go there and you pick up the tempo. It starts with the chef. Imagine if you create, most chefs say, my job is to show everything I know. The widest range of technique, the widest range of problems. You see a scallopini veal, it takes 2 minutes to cook. And a big double cut pork chop that takes 40 minutes to cook, or rack of lamb. And you yell out the order to the cooks. Scallopini, lobster, rack of lamb, you guys figure out the timing. What if you did reverse engineering instead? We're gonna make every appetizer take exactly 3 minutes to execute. You don't have to worry, just bring it up when it's ready. But chef, the salad takes only 1 minute. Okay? Do the Robuchon dots to make it make 3 minutes. Everything now takes exactly the same time. And the minute one station gets to 4 minutes instead of 3 minutes, send the labor there. Now we go to grill. In 3 minutes, the entrees, all 5 minutes. Now it's 6 minutes on the grill, send the team here. Same in the front of the house. So for $1,000 extra, we keep it 45 minutes. And we do 2 seatings instead of 1. And what happens? We go from 1% profit to 30% profit with just a tiny bit of third-grade math. 6 major false premise. Managing human beings the same way we manage objects. This is, again, this horrible cost-basis accounting management theory. If you read no other book in your life and want to revolutionize your restaurant or any business you own, Human Sigma. It talks about the fact that this is Gallup organization. Gallup polls, the largest study of business ever conducted. 20 years. 1 million different managers, 10 million different employees, every industry, private, public. What they found was that only 3% of managers are responsible for everything good. All sales growth, all profits. 97% are responsible for all bad things happening in the company. And what was it the 97% were doing? They were following the rules they were taught in business school. They were following the rules they were taught in the business. And they're all based on cost-basis accounting. What they discovered and published in Human Sigma is that the only way you create a great company is with extraordinary customer engagement. That's when a customer says, you know what? This is my iPhone. I love Apple. I couldn't live without Apple. Or, I love my Porsche. I'm a Porsche man. It's my identity. What they found also is you can't do that directly. The only thing that creates great customer engagement is extraordinary employee engagement. And they created tools, surveys, questionnaires, and systems on how to do this. You can take this slide and the 12 questions you ask to see how good your company is. And it can produce extraordinary changes in your business. How much better? This was in 2003, they said the companies that have a high Human Sigma outperform 26% in gross margin, 26% in gross margin, and 85% in sales growth. And that was in the early days before they refined this teaching technique. 7th major false premise, the GM organizational structure. We make the GM accountable for all 3 divisions of business, okay? And what we found is every other industry is learning about Human Sigma, using it, and they have doubled their scores in the last 20 years. And their businesses are thriving, except one business, restaurants. We have half the score. No one does it, no one teaches it. So this is the way we learn in the E-Myth to set up a company. 3 separate divisions. You have one individual who is in charge and responsible to one master finance. A second individual serves operations, and a third individual serves marketing, so you don't have conflict of interest. I speak for marketing only. But that's not the restaurant industry. We make a general manager responsible for everything. Notice all those gray squares are supposed to be done by the general manager. Why do we not allow a lawyer to represent both the husband and the wife in a divorce? Conflict of interest. We've created triple conflict of interest, and we burn out our GMs, and it's failure by design. So, our robot's going to take all the hospitality jobs. Let me give you a counter argument. Financial, let me admit the negative first. Yes, efficiency is terrible. Even with publicly traded restaurants, we generally are the worst of all industries in terms of revenue per employee or net income per employee. Horrible. But profitability, we're more in the middle range. We sometimes hit the 15, 20, and 30s. But in management effectiveness, we are extraordinary. In fact, in 2019, in publicly traded restaurants in America, we were the #1 industry, and we're talking about things like return on investment, ROI. This is the single most important metric for investors. Return on investment. Return on investment capital. And this is our circle of competency, and we should stay focused on it. What stock you should buy? Warren Buffett said the single most important thing that he makes a decision on long-term assets, long-term buying, is return on invested capital. So we should be careful that we are not investing in very, very expensive technology that could upset, okay, our return on invested capital. Our strength lies in reduced capital requirements relative to other industries. Chipotle outperformed most competitors primarily, among other things, because they found a way to build their restaurants for half the cost. That doubled the return on investment. The qualitative, we got to be careful about how to use technology correctly. We're all saying the same thing. There's a place for technology, but there's a place for human beings. So, bringing it all together, if all we are doing is retailing food and beverage, then we are massively overpriced, and we might as well just be a grocery store. Let's redesign our service component so that its primary purpose is to maximize customer engagement and help our guests seal the deal. Notice, we have 2 businesses under one roof. We have a service company and a manufacturing company, and they have opposite things. High degree of customer contact in the service, but low in the manufacturing. Low degree of uniformity of input in service, but high in manufacturing. So, we could use technology in the service company, so let's use the technology to help us enhance employee engagement and the ability to seal the deal for customers. And on the manufacturing side, let's use technology to help human beings increase throughput speed, allow them to spend more of their time doing creative rather than repetitive, and use human beings to help technology better deal with the non-uniformity of natural inputs. And a shift from rivalrous to anti-rivalrous activities. You can think about the fact that non-rivalrous produces, generates, rather than extracts. And one of the things I'd like to end on is this: employee engagement and ownership business models. Since 2011, KKR, a major portfolio company, they've been using an employee part owner business. So what they do is they make every single line worker a part owner in the business, and it gives them, every hourly production worker, a stake and a voice in contributing to the company's success. And they've introduced this to over 20 companies by now, I believe. And what they found was it pays off massively. They tend to get 500 basis points of improvement in EBITDA margin in the first few years because they're using a generative, collaborative, non-rivalrous model of employing their team. Thank you very much.